When it comes to making your own training plan, there are certain elements that you absolutely must consider in order for it to be effective. And we understand that it can be a little bit daunting if you're sat there with an empty calendar or a blank piece of paper and just tough to know where to start.
Yeah, so we want to help you and guide you through to build up to that perfect plan to get you fit and ready for your next race.
Now, this is not a sports science lesson, but there are some basic training principles that we need to cover that you will then want to consider when laying out your training. To start with, in order to get fitter and stronger, you need to push your body further or faster or both than it has done previously. And in a sense, this is actually causing some micro damage to your muscles. That's the first part. The second part is then allowing your body that time to recover from that micro damage, and that's where it builds and gets stronger. So you need to make sure that you've got your nutrition and your recovery included. Basically, it's about a balance between load and recovery.
And then there's specificity. Of course, there's no point in doing all of this training, perhaps doing super short, intense intervals, if your main goal is to do an Ironman. Don't forget to mix things up, to train all the elements of fitness and just keep things interesting. But don't forget what that main goal is. Also with that, do bear in mind that increasing volume and increasing intensity are both stressors on the body that, well, hopefully will make you fitter as a result. But only focus on increasing one at a time. Now, if you are focusing on the volume aspect, that's great, and keep track of that as you're increasing that in your training program. But also don't forget any intense sessions within that, because that, as I said, is also a stressor.
So with those basic principles in mind, you need to start to think of actually what is the goal? What is it you are trying to achieve? Is it a race that you've entered? If so, do you want to hit a certain time? Is it completing it? And then within that, maybe there's an element that you want to nail. Do you want to get certain numbers on the bike? Do you want to run it all? It really doesn't matter what that goal is, but it needs to be important to you and specific to you. And this is where it's quite a good idea to write that down, and then you've got record to reference and keep you on track. And that leads us on to timescale. When is this goal event? You want to put it in the calendar if you haven't already, and then work backwards from that. So you know just what sort of time frame you're working with. And if it's, say, months away, then great. You've probably got time to maybe work on a couple of different elements within that, and even include some training cycles. If, however, your timescale is quite short, and say you've only got 6 weeks, for example, then you're going to have to just make sure you optimize that time to get as fit as you can in that time available. Now, I mentioned cycles. When you're planning your training, you want to think of it as actually blocks within blocks. So overall, you've got the kind of whole chunk of the season, say, and that is your macro cycle. And then within that, you've got your meso cycle. So that could be, say, your months or 4-week training block. And within that 4-week block, you might want to do 3 weeks of really working hard, and then having your 4th week really easy, and you reset and you repeat that, and that allows your body that time to adapt and recover in that 4th easy week. But you can change the length of that whatever what works for you. And then again, the smallest block is the micro cycle, and that is, say, a 7-day period or a 10-day period. If you're working on the usual calendar week that lots of us go by, then you might want to be including 6 days of training and having your 7th day off. Some people prefer to do it as 10 days, so you work 9 days of training every day and then you take your 10th day off. But be aware with that obviously it's a bit of a longer block and a bit stronger on the body. But play around with that, and that's how you kind of structure your training and you build it up from there.
Well, now you know what the overall structure should look like. Now let's dive into the details a little bit more as to what it should look like on each day. And this requires a little bit of honesty with yourself. Let's take, for instance, you've got an hour workout to do in the morning, an hour in the evening after work. How does that really look? When you start taking into account things like getting your kit ready, traveling to a venue, cleaning your bike, warm-ups, cool-downs, various things like that. Also, let's not forget other rather important things like work, family. Okay, so once you have that, how does it really look on each day? Again, being honest with yourself. Okay, then once you have that figured, how does it now look on each day? What training are you really going to do? And you need to take into account things like pool times, and do you need to cycle during daylight hours? Do you have access to an indoor trainer? Do you prefer to do hard workouts in the morning or evening? Get that all figured out, and hopefully with that you'll be far more comfortable in the program and you'll stick to it. Now obviously, as we're training for triathlon, ideally we want a minimum of 6 sessions per week with a nice even split if possible, for example, 2 swims, 2 bikes, 2 runs. If you have any extra time, it makes sense then to focus on your weaknesses there. Also, don't forget conditioning. Obviously, cycling and running is obviously very leg dominant exercises and requires some conditioning with that. So if you can, do factor in some time for strength and conditioning work, and hopefully that'll pay off in the long run too.
Now, aside from that rough number as a guideline, you really want to be aware of your overall general health, so your fatigue, your nutrition and your stress. And we've talked about training stress, but actually, whether sadly or not, the stress that you have from other life factors, it all goes into the same pot. Your body doesn't differentiate from that. So say you've had a few weeks of really high stress at work, that is actually going to affect your body's ability to recover in the training. So you need to take that into account. And if on a day that you're just feeling like your body isn't on top of things, actually maybe taking that session off or even that whole day off, it could end up helping you in the bigger picture. And it means that you can then nail the rest of the week with your training. So for that, you're really going to have to learn to tune into your body a little bit. If you do want some guidance on externally on how to sort of measure this, if you're new to sport and you're just still learning those signs coming from your body, then if you've got a smartwatch or any other device, you can measure your resting heart rate. And if that's starting to go up, if you measure at the same time every morning, that's a bit of an indicator that maybe your body isn't adjusting to the load so well. Or if you have a smartwatch that gives you your heart rate variability, and sometimes they can give you your stress score or your recovery score, which are clear indicators on just how ready your body is to train that day and how it's adapting to this increase in load.
Well, there's a fair bit to consider when building your own training plan, so it's worth taking the time to consider all of the elements, and in doing so, you hopefully end up with a far more positive and enjoyable outcome as a result.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And if you are after some more training specific guidance or maybe some session inspiration, I recommend just checking out our channels. We've got plenty out there that will help guide you. So if you've enjoyed it, we'd love it if you gave us a like, and yeah, check out the channel by subscribing.